Clifton. Now known as High Cliff State Park, early settlers called this land Clifton for the exposed rock ledges along the shoreline. Part of the Niagara Escarpment, these ledges loom over 200 feet above Lake Winnebago. High Cliff and the small community of Sherwood share a colorful history that reflects the social and economic development of much of Wisconsin's early history. Jean Nicolet, a French Jesuit explorer, was the first European to explore this land called Wisconsin. These early explorers found Wisconsin to be a land rich in natural resources. Throughout the 1700s, the Fox River was an important trade route for the French and English fur trade with the Fox River Indian tribes. Conflicts with the Fox Indians, as well as the French and Indian War, ended French control of this area. With the end of the American Revolution in 1783, the area east of the Mississippi River became the property of the United States. Redbird was a proud Winnebago chief living on the banks of the Wisconsin River. Although he was friendly to the early white fur traders, settlers were forcing Indians from their land, and battles between the Winnebago and the settlers were increasing.
The first statue here is a wooden statue, and that was right about where the tower is standing now. That was made out of wood, and that was well known for many, many years for people would come to see the Indian statue. But the Redbird statue that you see today up there was donated by the Bond Association, the publishing company over in Menasha, and the statue was built, I believe, in New York.
Redbird was a Winnebago, or otherwise known as a Ho-Chunk Indian chief, and he didn't actually live here at High Cliff, but he visited here with his sons and his brothers from time to time. He was, in his day, I guess, considered a hero because he was a peace-loving man, and that's all he really wanted was peace between his people and the settlers. He actually tried to stop some of the fighting that was going on between the white man and the red man, and he tried to create peace by giving himself up to the United States Army back in 1828. By doing so, he felt that that was his way to tell everyone that the fighting should stop. And it was quite an awesome ceremony from what I understand. He showed up in his complete regalia. His dress was just awesome. He had white deerskin leggings and beads and wampum collars. That's what the statue in the park depicts, is this very elegant man surrendering himself to the United States Army in the hopes that he would somehow bring peace to the land. And in the end, he surrendered, and that he actually gave up his freedom. So when he did that, he was giving away his life. It's said that he died of a broken heart in prison at Prairie du Chien. But in fact, he may have starved to death. We don't really know the exact cause.
Sioux, Winnebago, Sauk, Fox, Menominee, Chippewa, Stockbridge, all called this land home.
The mounds at High Cliff are sometimes referred to as effigy mounds or as Indian mounds. And effigy might be a more accurate description of them. There's a lot we don't know about the mounds. We assume that they were built somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, and some of that information has come from mounds in Wisconsin that were carbon dated back to that time period. As far as whether or not these mounds, in particular at High Cliff, are burial mounds is also a point of contention. We don't have any specific information that tells us that they were burial mounds. The Wisconsin State Historical Society has a little bit of information relative to the time, I would say around the turn of the century, the 1900s that is, where several artifact seekers locally, including one of the Western Lime and Cement Company wives, who was very interested in artifact seeking, did a little excavation in the mounds. And from what we know, very little as far as artifacts were found. Some things were found in the mounds. What we do know is that we don't know what kind of spiritual or territorial or astronomical meanings they have, but definitely they were important to people thousands of years ago who lived right here.
Whatever their use, they hold great religious value to local Indian culture and are an important link to our past. In the 1830s, the United States federal government forced entire tribes to leave their native land and resettle west of the Mississippi River. The end of the Native American resistance opened up the land for a great wave of European immigrants. Many of these new settlers were veterans of the Black Hawk War, who later worked on the construction of the military road from Fort Howard in Green Bay to Fort Crawford in Prairie du Chien. These new settlers found that they could make a good living in the abundant forests and fertile soil of the High Cliff area. In the 1830s, two of Wisconsin's prominent historical figures, Green Bay land baron and attorney Henry Baird, and future Wisconsin Congressman James Duane Doty, purchased much of the land surrounding High Cliff. Long before this was a state park, the forests brought settlers to this land. Sawmills were the first industries along the Lake Winnebago shoreline. Lumber was shipped over the lake to Oshkosh in sailing vessels. Much of the social history of High Cliff and Sherwood has been well documented, thanks to the efforts of lifelong Sherwood resident Joe Dietrich.
The barn you see down there, that's where they kept their horses, and they would at least have I would say at least 4 to 5 teams of horses. 2 would be up in the quarry all the time, and then they had to make their hay, and they had to haul freight. Down the far end, on my right, you'll see the school down there. When this picture was taken, that was a Whitman a farm down there, and his name was Bismarck. And Bismarck was the veterinarian. And then you have the old store there. The road that you see there is gone now. It's all made into homes. On my left would be the marina now. I remember when they cut all the trees down to make it. And those homes down there you see are company houses. And all these people that worked for the lime kiln lived in those houses. And that was part of their life, their pay. I always think about Tennessee Ernie Ford, that 16-ton, what do you got? That's about what it was.
Alex Hart settled here in the 1850s, and as with most of the country's early settlers, Mr. Hart was a hard-working entrepreneur. He saw opportunity in the old Indian trail up the cliff. Striking a deal with the county government for the sum of $200, Hart, using only hand tools, opened up the trail for wagons to pass through.
In 1851, Alex Hart was commissioned to widen the old Indian path, and that was the path that led from the upper ledge to the lower area near the lake. And that path was the only way to get from the upper part of the ledge to the lake. So at that time, people were recreating already in the park, what was to become the park, and they needed a way to go up and down, not only to enjoy the upper area, but also to take their carts and horses and travel to Menasha. And it was kind of a shortcut to get to Sherwood as well. He widened the road. It took him a couple of years, and he used an axe, a pickaxe, a shovel, and a sledgehammer, and he did it all by hand.
From the late 19th century through the early part of the 20th century, much of the country's best construction limestone came from right here in Wisconsin. A rich deposit of dolomite extends from near Madison through Sturgeon Bay in Door County and can be seen in the cliffs right here at High Cliff. The first lime kilns at High Cliff were built by Cook and Brown. Lime produced at this plant was first used in mortar and plaster for building and in agriculture.
The first kiln was built right on the lake shore, right up against the water. And that burned down, and it was rebuilt right there in that spot. And then the second mill was then located where the present-day ruins are. In some pictures, you can see the kiln that was first built on the lake shore in operation, as well as the second kilns in operation. The kiln that was originally built on the lake shore burned down and was not rebuilt, and then the other kilns continued to operate until it was closed.
This is what you see now. There was 3 kilns in there. They made lime. You make lime, you burn the stone. And it can't be hard, it has to be soft, it has to be a limestone, they call it. I mentioned Sunny Island. Well, when they would bring the stone in, it would come in on a cable car from up above. The full load would bring the empty up, you know. That's the way it worked. And then once he got it down on the bottom here, then he would unhook it, and he'd have to push it across either 1, 2, or 3 kill, wherever they wanted it. Well, this particular day he unhooked it, and while he was pushing it across, he either fell or slipped or whatever. Anyway, he lost his life. He fell in. And they had to shut the whole thing down and get him out. It was quite a sight when it was going, you know. I remember as a kid we'd be fishing on the lake in the summertime, and the kilns would be going and the smoke would be rolling out.
Limestone for use in the kiln is first quarried out by blasting with black powder. Deep holes are drilled into the ledge and are loaded with high explosives. There's no loud report from the explosion, but the force of the powder can move the face of the ledge out over 100 feet. The lime kilns are vertical shafts of heavy masonry. The limestone is dumped into the top. 2 fires in each kiln at the sides of the shafts maintain intense heat around 2,000 degrees. Our experienced firemen know just when to draw the finished lime. Lime that retains some unburnt core generally makes the best mortar. Western Lime and Cement, Company Report, 1920.
With their company rapidly growing, Cook and Brown built a general store and company houses for the kiln workers. A post office was established in 1856. Henry Raymond, the first postmaster, is credited with naming the community Clifton, although it was also called Lower Cliff by many of the residents. It was soon discovered that there was another Wisconsin village named Clifton, and the name was changed to High Cliff. Railroads brought more prosperity to the community. Shipping by rail allowed Cook and Brown to expand their markets to Green Bay and Milwaukee. Around 1916, Cook and Brown installed phone lines from the general store to the brickyards and to the nearby community of Sherwood. These lines were soon merged into the Stockbridge and Sherwood Telephone Company.
And down below the kilns, there was Pete Van Ditter. He had a summer bar, beer bar, you know. And we go down there, and he had a boat livery, and we'd always go down there in the evening, and I'd say, Pete, we're going fishing tomorrow morning, and we're going out at 5:30. Well, he says, don't wake me. You can have boat so-and-so, but don't wake me. Where you see those docks out there, that was where Pete's boat livery was. Then when Pete left, then it became Red Funk. He had it, so the state picked it all up. Rob Funk. Now Rob, he did all drilling, and it's a steam engine thing. That's how this drill was powered. And I was sort of a buddy of his. My dad hauled gravel out of there for the town of Harrison, and we lived up on Clifton Road, and every so often my mother would say, Joe, you take the dad's lunch down to him at noon. So that meant I had enough lunch for me too. But I always made sure I was in the quarry about 11 o'clock or so. And now mind you, I was sitting in the dynamite shed with Rob here, and he would set all his fuses and caps and get all his dynamite ready. There was long fuses, and some were half that length. When he set them off, he'd set the long ones first, and he'd go to the next one. So by the time they would start going off, he was clear, and he could count how many went off. And the reason they did that was because the rock was so huge, they had to blow it up at 11:30 just so the guys could pound it apart and handle it to get it a load. Because when they loaded out, the guy loading it, he'd have to pound it, pick it up and put it in his wagon, and they got paid by the load. Not by the hour, not by the day, but by the load. There was quite a crew working in the quarry and in the kilns, and those things had to be fired day and night, you know. You couldn't shut them down and then go back the next morning. No, they would be fired all night. They must have used wood at first because they had to do a lot of clearing of land to get the kilns up. Now this is Gordon Funk, they call him Guggy, and those are the carts he used. Those horses, they got to the point where he didn't hardly have to drive them, you know, he just hook on, and all he did was drive the team. And there might have been 2 or 3 wagons like that out there, and he'd haul them over to either the crusher area, which had a cable car, or to the kiln. Then he would dump the load and bring it on back, and then he had to keep track of all these guys that loaded. They had like a brass, like a coin, about that big, big as a $50 maybe, and there was a number on there, and that was your number. If you were number 2, number 3, whatever you were, he turned them in, and that's how you got paid. So they had to have quite a load on. They just couldn't have it level. They had a load, and they had to pound all that stuff apart too. Those horses got to the point they just knew exactly what they had to do and all that sort of stuff. So this is where all the crushed rock was brought in. Above those pillars, those were the bins, and the truck would drive in underneath, and whatever size he wanted, if he had big or small, whatever it was, he would dump it himself. And the crusher above, he could direct that stuff into any bin he wanted. Well, these are all loaded out. Those are barges to cross the lake.
As with any growing community, High Cliff soon had a church, school, blacksmith shop, barber, and mason. In 1884, Protestant pastor L.F. Emmert supervised the construction of the congregation's first formal church.
Families, mainly German, were anxious to have a Protestant house of worship in the 1860s. They formed an evangelical church. My grandparents were among the first settlers who began holding services in a cabin on the Lake Road. Willard Lubke.
Now this church was on Pigeon Road, 1904 until 1919, and then it dispersed. Part of the parish went to Neenah, I believe, and the other part went to Forest Junction. So that's where you get the cemetery down here. Charlie Covitter, he went ahead and bought that church, tore it down, and that's how he started to build his house on the lake.
With the growth in population, a couple of taverns soon appeared. In 1898, F.B. Stevens built his tavern with bricks from the local brickyard. Stevens' two-story building included rented rooms and a dance hall.
That's their museum. And like I said, those homes, those white buildings, those are the company homes. One time when it was all said and done and the state took it over, a guy by the name of Bob Ponto, he lived down by Ferry Springs. And he bought one of those houses, and they hauled it down there on the lake in the wintertime. And this is the barn, the horse barn. And imagine Petey Fiddler had his burrow in there. And I wouldn't be surprised if you find a couple cows or two to keep them supplied in milk. The brickyard that would be between High Cliff and Ferry Springs. If you wonder what those guys did in the wintertime, you know, the kilns, they more or less shut down. They would make ice on the lake here, and there was one for sure down in Lower Cliff here, ice house, and there was about 3, maybe 4 in Sherwood. And they would fill those buildings up with ice and pack it with sawdust, and then that's how you kept your stuff cold in the summertime. I remember when my dad had this tavern in Sherwood, they had a cooler, and the iceman would come in, and they had a ramp, and they would hoist those things right up into that cooler, maybe 400 or 500 pounds. This is Rob, my old buddy Rob Funk. He's the guy I always hung out with. He got a sturgeon there. And, you know, years ago, we talk about sturgeon, you could buy up to 5 tags. There wasn't as many people out as you have now. This is Red Funk and Pete Beer Bar, boat livery. But there's his boats all lined up. We'd come out there and fish for white bass off the pier. He was a good guy. Nice to be around. We used to have a lot of fun down there. That whole shed was full of boats, all aluminum boats. Before he came in, down the roadways, Charlie Covitter was there, and he had a boat livery, and he made all his boats, and they were just like, oh, wood, heavy, you know. And his job was, he had a couple cows, and he rented boats, but every day, 5 days a week, he'd come into a little store down there, the little post office, pick up their mail, come into Sherwood, pick up the mail there at the post office, go down to the depot, unload it, pick the mail up, and come back home. He did that twice a day.
High Cliff Park, even in its early years, was a popular recreation area. In the late 1880s, Alonzo Milner built a tavern and dance hall here at the top of the cliff.
This hill was developed by the WPA, and they built walls on the sides and widened it out somewhat. It was just a way of getting up the hill at first. I don't think a car could have made it. You can see the dance hall up on top. At that time, it wasn't the amusement park that I remember. You know, at that time it was more or less a dance and a bar room and such. They all had to walk up this hill to get there from the boat. Below here they call that the rock garden, and they had steps going down into it, and they had flowers down in there. Once they made it into a state park, they shut that down because people might get hurt, you know, roaming around down in there. But you imagine all the people that came to that spot every week. I remember going down that hill one time with my dad's car, and I didn't know enough to put it in low gear, and I went down in high gear, and then they rolled it over. Mrs. Yachtville was sitting on her porch, and I think she died twice.
Visitors from surrounding communities came to High Cliff to enjoy leisurely weekend picnics and beautiful lake views. Soon there were lunch stands, rides for the kids, and a bandstand. Sunday afternoon concerts brought people from even greater distances. Soon excursion boats were bringing people across the lake from Oshkosh and Menasha.
Now this thistle came on the Oshkosh. It was a paddle boat, and it would go into Stockbridge and pick up, and then it would come on into High Cliff, and they'd all go up to the amusement park. And in the evening they'd take them on back again. And my mother would tell me when she was a young woman, they would, her and her sisters, they would take the boat from Stockbridge to Oshkosh and go shopping, and then in the evening they come back. There's the merry-go-round, and that's the bar I remember. The main road is to my right coming down, and behind that bar they had hamburgers and all that sort of stuff. They had popcorn, and then the round building next to the merry-go-round, that was called the arcade, and they had all these nickel and penny machines in there. Now this is the tavern. Eddie Verbeek and Cooney Essler, they had it. They owned the Nightingale, which was out at Kaukauna. So we'd come up here on Sunday and Saturday. I was running rides out there, maybe one of the kiddie rides, and work in the afternoon, make maybe $5 at the most. But we'd always end up with a couple passes to the Nightingale ballroom. And that's how I got to see the Dorseys and Harry James, Lawrence Welk, all the big name bands are out there. And look at the cars and look at the guys, huh? Really something. I would say right after World War I, 1920. Here's the train. Oh, that has the train up there. Kids love the train. And they had a popcorn stand. That's one of the Emery Schilling's daughter running the stand. Yeah, but it's Emery Schilling on stilts. Standing next, that's Eddie Verbeek. And if you look right beyond him, you see that that thing out there. That was, you put your nickel in. I suppose it was a nickel, and then it was like field glasses. There's the merry-go-round. A guy by the name of Wiedenoff. He ran the merry-go-round. He'd say he was rough and tough like a Wiedenoff. So he was. I know that one time, I don't know which finger he lost up there. You know, got wound up in something. And he just wrapped it up and kept going. They had a Ferris wheel too. They had swings.
The High Cliff Amusement Park was built around 1923, and it was run by Mike Neeson. He operated the amusement park for quite a while. There was a merry-go-round that was steam-powered. There were all sorts of rides that were added later on. But it was quite an attraction for people to come to. I kind of refer to it as the mini Bay Beach of Lake Winnebago, because there were a lot of rides here that were pretty unique to this area. One of my other memories of the amusement park was the mechanical fortune teller, who was kind of scary to me as a little kid. But there was a hamburger stand where you could buy hamburgers for a dime, and a bandstand where you could listen to the local Sherwood band.
The bandstand there with the white shirt on, that's my dad. I think it was a Legion convention of some sort up there. Coney convention. And here, they had their own band. The guy with the trombone, that's Wes Seidel up there. The guy with the tip of the flag there, Vic Ludicky. And when we were kids, and we were old enough to go fishing and stuff, we had cars and stuff, we'd always see where Vic was fishing off of Coney Park. And so we'd fish off of him, because he was out there. But he wised up to us too. We'd get all set up and he'd come out and hook onto a shanty and move on. So and this is another view of High Cliff. Standing on the far end there, that's Pat Stravey, and I imagine his wife is in there somewhere. And right below him is that road going down into the lower part. If you look out There's nothing out there yet. It's just farmland. This is the rock garden down below. It was pretty down in there. There was a lady, Emmers had it one time and ran it, and that lady really had flowers down in there. They always had to have hats on, notice that? And all dressed up, the guys too. And this is that platform coming off the ledge, you know. There was steel beams on it. You walk out there and stand there and get a girl to come out and then start shaking it. And oh my goodness gracious alive. But as soon as it became a state park, they got rid of it.
High Cliff Park was sold to Mike Neeson in the 1920s. During this time, a strange attraction began at High Cliff, the High Cliff Car Jump.
A guy by the name of Woomarungi, he had the salvage yard in Sherwood here, cars, you know. He'd bring them up. And that was one of the events of 4th of July. And he'd tie the doors open and get her going and hop out, and over she'd come, you know. Big deal. Well, that was something to look forward to. And this is what they looked like down below. To this day, you'll still find stuff down there, you know.
Now the concept was simple enough. A driver, standing on the running boards of an old car, would steer toward the edge of a cliff and jump off just before the car went over the edge. As far as anyone knows, no one was ever killed during this event.
Through the 1920s and 30s, it's true. Men actually went over the edge of the cliff with their cars. Well, probably not the men in them. The stories talk about the men standing on the running board and taking a stick and pushing it down on the accelerator. And some of the daredevils, I understand, did sit in the cars, but everyone jumped out at the last minute before the car went over the edge. And it was just a spectacular crash at the bottom. People would go through Menasha and Appleton, and they would have big placards that would say, "Car crash coming at High Cliff this Saturday." And the 4th of July was always the big event. And I heard stories that at times they would even rig up the cars with dynamite just to make a spectacular 4th of July explosion.
The car jump continued through the late 1930s. And the amusement park operated until 1960, when the area was sold to the state of Wisconsin. In 1964, High Cliff State Park was officially dedicated. Over the years, the old general store had fallen into disrepair and closed in 1969. Threatened with demolition, a local retired businessman, John Stump, spearheaded an effort with the High Cliff Historical Society to save the store he remembered from his youth.
High Cliff General Store was originally operated and built by the Cook and Brown Company. Later, the ownership changed as Western Lime took over in the Nast family. Of course, the families would run a tab here, and the women would come in for their bulk supplies, flour, sugar, maybe fabric, even could order glasses for the family and have those shipped in. But those receipts would then come off of the man's paycheck. What's kind of interesting is that each of the storekeepers who operated the general store, each of the families lived here and operated the store for 23 years. The general store operated up until 1969. By that time, a lot of the general products, the milk and produce had kind of gone out, but it served campers, I think, primarily in the late 60s and had amenities for campers, but it was 1969 when it finally closed. The first post office at Clifton, Wisconsin, which is High Cliff, was established here in the general store in 1856. And Henry Raymond was the very first postmaster for the general store. In its heyday, High Cliff had a population of about 200 to 250 people. The people who lived here lived in company housing directly across from the old country store here. Most, if not all of those people worked at the quarry operation or the sawmill or the brickyard. Well, one of the more interesting pieces in the museum is this old safe. And there's a couple of different stories that have been told through the years about what happened to this safe. But essentially what happened is that a couple of young boys broke into the general store and thought they were going to strike it rich. So they had apparently stolen some dynamite from the quarry and blew the door open of this cast iron safe, hoping to get at the contents. Apparently, whatever was in there must have been blown up and destroyed with the dynamite. But interestingly enough, the safe was moved out onto the front porch and sat out there for about 40 years. Somewhere along the line, one of the storekeepers decided that they didn't want it sitting on the porch, so they dug a great big hole in the lawn outside the general store and buried it, and it sat under the ground for 30 more years. So it was outside for 70 years, until finally in the early 1970s, when a couple of young men from the Fox Valley area returned from the Vietnam War, they had a new invention called a metal detector. They had heard a story about that there could be an old safe buried next to the store. So they asked the curator, Bun Funk, if she'd be interested in showing them where she thought it would be. So they took their metal detector and with the permission of the park superintendent, got a good read on it and started digging. So eventually they did uncover the old safe, and today it sits right here where the old safe originally sat.
In 1957, some native people around here, the Stumps and the Schaefers and those, decided they wanted a state park here and approached the DNR. And I guess at that time it was a Conservation Commission instead of the DNR. But they wanted a park in this area, and things were changing so fast in the limestone business. So I think they were ready to sell. But the marina was just, actually was a creek that came from the east here, and right across the marina was a schoolhouse for this area. Part of the park at that time when it started, some money was raised with Sportsman Club in Needham and Ash and Apple and Kaukauna to get the marina started. So we had a small group of businessmen from the valley here at High Cliff Park Association, they call themselves, and donated a lot of money into the park here, and they spent over $500,000 getting this park started. They put in half the money for the pavilion up there. They built the tower, Redbird statue. One man alone, Mr. Shattuck from Neenah, helped fund the marina when it was built, like $90,000.
I know that John Stump had definitely had a passion for the historical value of these buildings, the lime kilns, and especially the old country store. And he made sure that he communicated with anyone he could in Madison, legislators, to preserve the history. So he worked very hard to come up with a solution, and the solution was the establishment of the High Cliff Historical Society. The Friends of High Cliff State Park have embraced this little country store and have worked to do some painting and cleaning and fix it up and preserve artifacts for the future. The group does have long-range plans to rehabilitate the building structurally so that will stand for another 100, 150 years.
Now operated by the Friends of High Cliff, the general store serves a new population of park visitors, preserving our rich heritage and giving us a glimpse into our past.